So we left our hotel at a very early 5 a.m. this morning to take a taxi to the top of Victoria Peak, where we then had to walk just about a mile to get to this awesome vantage point of Hong Kong. This isn't just one of the best vantage points in Hong Kong, it might be one of the most spectacular views of a cityscape in the world. It's very rare to encounter a location like this where you have the chance to look down from such a high vantage point at so many skyscrapers below. This is what I really consider to be the ultimate urban sprawl. There are so many towers down there, all so close together, and they go on just about as far as the eye can see. Now, I wanted this area to be the finale for the cityscape portion of this video because, to be honest, it's probably my favorite view of a cityscape in the world. It also provides plenty of unique challenges. Now, usually the weather is semi-mild where you can kind of see the infinite background and some of the mountains. Today, this morning in particular, it's so smoggy that we can't actually see the back of the city. It just disappears into the smog line. I've shot here many times over the last few years, and it can be really difficult to get the weather to cooperate for this shot. Last time I was in the city, I spent 5 mornings in a row to get exactly what I wanted. Today, the weather is particularly bad, which kind of sucks because we did get up very early to come up here. Now, it's really difficult when you're staying in the city. Right now, we're staying with a decent view out the window, but we're surrounded by so many skyscrapers in central Hong Kong that it's really hard to see the sky. So the best I can do in the morning is look out the window, try to figure out how much smog there is, and see if it's worth getting up to come up here. Now, since this is the finale for the cityscape portion of this video, I really want the shot to look good. So what we're going to do is come up here a few more mornings to see if we can get the weather conditions that we really want. You can see by this reference frame that I've taken this morning that the conditions are definitely less than perfect. In fact, less than perfect is actually kind of being nice. In the background, we can't see any of the mountains. We actually can't even see the horizon line. We're just packed into this dense cloud of fog with the smog level mixed in, and the density of the air is so thick that it's cutting the clarity of the shot. If you look out over the city right now, you can tell that the blue hour is just starting to begin. Now, it does have sort of a dreamy quality to it, more of a Gotham City kind of look. And since we've already invested so much time getting up early and setting up, I'm gonna go ahead and shoot through the blue hour anyway, just in case by some miracle the weather decides to clear up. Personally, I've been here enough times to know that this shot can be way better. So I'm gonna come back for another sunset and another sunrise to see if we can get a better shot. All right, so this is attempt number 2 on Victoria Peak to try to nail that iconic Hong Kong cityscape. The first morning we were up here, it was a little bit hazy and we had that really dark cloud that eventually drove us off because, quite honestly, we thought we were going to get rained on. Today's not looking much better. In fact, I think it's looking worse. The weather had set to be pretty clear, so we came up here for sunset, but the haze has sort of moved in. Not only that, we have a crystal clear sky if you look straight up, but we have this smog line just falling over the entire city. So no matter what I do tonight, I'm always going to have to work with that strong haze. Now, atmospheric haze can destroy cityscape images because it cuts down on the clarity. Now, there are a few things we can do in post to try to bump that contrast, but overall what we're looking for a shot like this, especially dealing with this much distance, is the most clear atmosphere possible because that will give us all the definition and clarity that we're looking for. Take a look at the shot I just got with my Fuji X-T1. As you can see, we can hardly see the mountains in the background. Now let's take a look at this shot. I shot this last time I was in Hong Kong and it was nearly crystal clear. You can see all the clarity, depth, and detail. Not only that, you can see some color and texture in the sky. So right now, this is a night and day difference. Now, as a full-time photographer, this is a reality that I face all the time while I'm on the road. Sometimes I get shots within the first few days. Sometimes it takes me multiple visits to get exactly what I want. To get that shot I showed you of Hong Kong that I really liked, I was here for a week and I came up 5 mornings to this spot and 3 sunsets before I got the sky and the scene that I really wanted. So you have to invest the time necessary and you have to spend that time shooting to really get what you want. So that's why we always say to plan extra days and really try. If it's a shot that you really want, spend multiple mornings, multiple nights, really really concentrate on getting exactly the weather conditions that you're looking for. With this video tutorial, we really wanted to have epic shots for us to work on together. But the reality is, sometimes these shots are going to be failures because there are so many things like the weather that are completely out of our control. Now, coming to Hong Kong in the winter time, the weather's really nice because the temperature is really cool, but you get a smog layer generally every day over the city. That doesn't mean you can't have clear days in winter too, but the clearest days actually happen in the summertime. But producing this tutorial, we're doing it at the beginning of the year, so we had to get to Hong Kong at this point. We didn't want to push things back 6 months just for this one shot. But if you do visit Hong Kong yourself, keep in mind that summertime is way better for photography. You're going to get a clearer atmosphere, and also it's during the monsoon season. So while you might get wet sometimes while you're shooting, you're also going to have great thunderclouds that add incredible drama to the skies while you're shooting. So this is now 2 attempts where I don't like the conditions and I don't like the shot I ended up with. So we're gonna get up at 4:30 tomorrow, come back up here and try one more time to get the shot. Now, if the weather doesn't cooperate, don't worry. We're still gonna take the best of the 3 attempts into Photoshop and try to make it the best possible shot. So I've been trying to get the 3rd attempt from the Victoria Peak to get that really nice skyline shot, but we've run into some problems with the weather. Mainly every morning it's been really smoggy, really hazy, with visibility only at about 7 kilometers according to the reports, which is really bad, which means we get up there, we can kind of see some of the towers, can't even see the mountains. So what I've been doing the last few days is waking up every morning at 4 o'clock. I have a good view from the hotel room so I can look out the window and I can decide if it's too hazy. And the past 2 days when I looked out the window, I can see the near towers close to my window are stuck in haze. So I know going up there is going to be a waste of time. So we weren't able to do the 3rd attempt because we knew that it would just result in a failure. And that is a shame, but it's also part of the issues when you're dealing with any environment, especially Hong Kong where the weather does change pretty rapidly and they are known for their haze. Ironically enough, this is our last day in Hong Kong, and tomorrow in the next series of 3 or 4 days are supposed to be crystal clear and beautiful. So that's just the way it goes sometimes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take those 2 photos that we got and we're gonna process the one that looks the best. And since I really wanted to get a really good photo out of this, I wanted to have something great to work on with that shot in Hong Kong, I'm gonna open up my archives and we're gonna take a look at a shot that I got a few months ago when I was in Hong Kong where we have a beautiful sky and a crystal clear environment. So this opens up a really unique opportunity because we can look at the files that we got, figure out how to make the best of them, and then take a look at an example of something that looks amazing too. So you can see how it can vary from day to day and even season to season in Hong Kong. Welcome everyone back to the post-processing studio. We are still in Hong Kong, and this is probably one of my favorite places in Hong Kong. You guys just watched us shoot from a very beautiful yet very gloomy Victoria Peak. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take a look at the shot that I like the most that we got out of there. And it's kind of cool. It's got this gloomy sky, this really crazy cloud line. It almost looks like a Gotham City, Hong Kong kind of thing. But just to keep this interesting, and so this is one of the more complicated blends we've done so far with cityscapes, I was able to dig through my archives when I was in Hong Kong in 2014. I was there in the summer, and I had crazy cool weather. So we are basically gonna go for the hardest blending shot possible, and that's combining a sun in frame with a blue hour. So everything we've done so far has been a sunset sky, but we haven't had a sun in the frame. So we're taking 2 extremes, basically a nighttime scene and a sunrise scene where the sun is actually glaring and causing specular highlights and different colors and shades. So it's gonna be the hardest thing we've put together so far, and it's a great finale for the cityscapes. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at the shot that we got when we were there on those gloomy days. Because the reality of it is you could go to Hong Kong for an entire week, go up to Victoria Peak every morning, and still not get the shot that you want. But out of those shots, you're always going to want to pick the one that you like the best and do the best you can with it. So let's take a look at what we got. All right, so here's what I have for us for this lesson. This is basically the best shot that I got from Victoria Peak the entire time we were in Hong Kong. You can see it's very dark, but it was dark and gloomy, and this tower back here actually disappears back into this crazy cloud line. It actually didn't really rain. Believe it or not, this is mostly smog mixed with a little bit of rain, but we were lucky we didn't get wet. It was very cold that morning. Patrick forgot to wear a jacket. It was actually kind of funny. He doesn't even remember any of it because he spent the whole morning shivering. So we're going to take a look at this file first, and then after that, we're actually going to get into this sunrise here. So you can see I have a very beautiful sunrise with the sun in the frame, but by the time this happened in the sky, you can see that there are no lights in the building. So the idea is to be able to combine one of these exposures of a sunrise with one of these exposures of the blue hour. So we have this beautiful cityscape, but you can see it's a blue hour sky. I want to make it a little bit more interesting and most importantly, 100% unique by combining these two things together. The first thing that I want to do is talk about this scene. And before we start color correcting it or doing anything like that, we're going to go ahead and get into the keystoning element again. Before I do some keystoning, I'm just going to pull up the shadows just as a reference so we can see what's going on in there. I want to be able to find the edges of the building. So you guys remember we can go under the crop section here, and then we have keystoning. Now, we've done this a couple different ways. We've changed it just by toggling these sliders, and that works pretty well. But it only works if you know that your horizon is level. Since I was shooting from really up high, I was trusting the in-camera level. I'm not really sure if it's level. And the nice thing about keystoning, once you draw your two parallel vertical lines for the buildings, and it conforms and skews them, it's also going to figure out how much it should rotate and also how much it should skew. So if our rotation is off a little bit, it'll compensate and fix that as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable the keystoning, and I'm just going to kind of throw these down over here on some of these lines that I want to work with. So we'll go ahead and pick something close to the edge, something that looks like it's going to be easy to follow. And I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit. We'll start here on the right, zoom in a little bit more. One more time, just so we can get as close as possible, and I'm just going to go ahead and follow the edge of the building here, this brown building. Remember, once I have one of these modules and the keystoning selected, I can go ahead and use the arrow tools to nudge it and make sure that I'm following that edge to the best of my ability. You can either zoom out and then zoom back in, or you can just pan, hold the space bar just like Photoshop, and then we'll figure out if this is going to be a good line to correct. This is nice, high area of contrast. That should work out well. We'll just go ahead and tweak this a little bit and make sure we follow that line okay. I'm going to zoom all the way out and I'm going to click Apply. There we go. And you can see that it's going to correct all those lines. I'm just going to take a look, and they look pretty vertical to me. This one right here is following along that line pretty well. But what I want to do next is I want to say or enable crop outside of the image. And here's why. Because if I enable crop right now, it's going to break me to these bounding areas of what's inside of this frame, so I can't exceed it. But when I say crop outside image, I can go ahead and crop all the way. We've been doing this because I want to go ahead and maximize the area that I'm able to use and possibly recreate some of the sky, though I'm not sure exactly if we're going to do that yet. So now, with this enabled, what I'm going to do is go back to the main menu, and I'm just going to pick the select tool again, go back to the main menu, and I'm going to turn the shadow enhancement off. Because basically what I've done is just done the keystoning. Next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and take care of the distortion. So we're going to do that under lens correction. These are Nikon D810 files, so we're going to go ahead and say 100% and 100% for the light fall off. And then what I like to do when I'm shooting with the 14-24, this is zoomed in a little bit, but what I like to do is go ahead and use the sharpness fall off, because it does get a little softer at the edge of the lens. So now I have the distortion taken care of, I have the keystoning taken care of. Now it's time to work on the color correction. First thing that I want to address here is the color tonality. But before I do that, I'm just going to go put this shadows back just a little bit, just so I can see what's going on here. And I'm going to go to the colors, and we're going to adjust the white balance. Right now, it just seems a little purple to me. I want to make it a little bit more blue, fix the tonality a little bit. So what I'm going to do is pull the Kelvin down just a little bit. I'm going to shift it to the left. And I'm going to keep it somewhere right around 4100, looks pretty good. You can see that now it's turning it into a nice blue hour, and I'm actually going to reset the shift to 0, I think. And we're going to see how that looks. And let's make it an even 4100. Perfect. So now I have something that's a little bit more blue rather than purple, and that looks pretty good. Next thing, let's go ahead and adjust the shadows and the highlights. Well, the first thing that I want to do before I do that is obviously this is severely underexposed, and I did this in a single exposure. I shot 3 exposures, but I brought the best exposure in for us to work on. So what I'm going to do is just bring this up just a little bit, and I'm going to try to get it to be right around 1/4 of a stop here, and I'm also going to change the highlights just a little bit. Even though the only highlight we can see is really going to be this one right here. I don't think there's any way to really recover that. And I'm also going to bump the shadows just a hair, maybe 15, just to pull the values up a little tiny bit. The other thing that I want to add here, which I don't add all the time, is clarity. And the reason being, if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see that we have so much haze. And by increasing the clarity, I can actually cut some of that haze down. You can see as I start to increase it, it's going to start popping that background down. Now it's different. If you guys use Lightroom, Lightroom clarity adds this, it's a really crunchy noise pattern over the whole thing. But clarity inside of Capture One is sort of like a tonal contrast, fixes edges, bumps contrast and stuff like that. So a little bit of this when you're working with hazy environments can go a long way. We'll keep it really simple, something just around 25. Let's zoom it back out here. That looks pretty good. All right, so I think that's about ready to take into Photoshop with our adjustments here. I'm gonna go ahead and right-click and export the variant. I've actually already brought a version of this in, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy it, and I'm gonna bring it in here. And what I actually have here is the original RAW versus the adjusted RAW. Now, as you can see, the before and after is pretty significant. We've just changed the tonality, we've changed a little bit of the contrast, but now we're gonna have to kind of go in here and surgically add more contrast to this very flat scene. Now, it does have a couple things working for it. It's very dramatic, in fact, probably a little too dramatic. It's got this crazy cloud above it and this really light area here. So there's some separation between this cloud line and this smog and this city. So I'm gonna see if I can accentuate that. So we're gonna go up to Filter, Nik Collection, Color Effects Pro. All right, so here we are in Color Effects Pro. I'm gonna go ahead and select Pro Contrast. I'll turn it all the way down here, and I think the first thing that I'm gonna do is bump the dynamic contrast. So we're gonna go up to about, let's say 40%. I'm gonna correct the contrast a little bit, and that's gonna brighten up the whole scene a little bit, somewhere around 10 or 12. And then let's see what the correct color cast does. I have a feeling it's gonna start adding some yellow back into the scene. And all the way to the right, you can see it's a little bit too much, adding a little bit too much yellow and green to compensate for the cool tones. But just a little bit will help pop some of those city lights out. And not too much, something around 30% I think will give us a nice before and after. Before moving on to any other details, I'm just gonna go ahead and say okay now. That looks pretty good. Let's name this layer 2. So it's gonna be Color Effects Pro, and I'll call it Contrast. So now what I've done is I've just added some basic contrast to the scene. But what I want to do now is I want to add some ridiculous contrast to the sky. And I'm going to do that with tonal contrast. But before I do that, I'm going to try to do some pre-cleaning on this. You can see there's quite a few sensor spots. Now this is really tough because the more that we enhance this sky, the more we're going to start to see these spots. So basically just going to use the selective heal, and I'm going to get rid of some of these. I know I'm going to have to get rid of some more of them later. This definitely happens a lot at the blue hour. You can see here's a spot. I'm not going to be able to get all these now, but we're going to come back and get them a little bit later. But I just want them to be kind of as clean as possible before I move on to the next step. So essentially what I want to do now is go back into Color Effects Pro, and I'm going to add tonal contrast just to the sky to try to pop the details out here and make this much more dramatic and ominous. So we'll go back to Nik Collection, load Color Effects Pro one more time. All right, let's select tonal contrast, and I'm just gonna reset it. I think I'm gonna use some soft tonal contrast here, maybe just 15 and 0 in the saturation. There's no reason to bump the saturation. And I'm gonna take a look at the before and after. So you can see it's accentuating the hell out of this cloud line here. In fact, it's making it look much more ominous and much more like it's gonna rain. Here, it's making it look really grainy and bad. So what I'm gonna do is apply this, and then I'm gonna mask in the area that I wanna use. But before I do that, I'm gonna bring it back into Color Effects to get rid of some of the noise. But the first thing we need to do is go ahead and hit OK. Overall, the tonal contrast looks pretty good, but before I apply it selectively, I'm just going to go ahead and select the layer, and we're going to go to filter one more time, but this time we're going to use define. Remember, once we get into define, it has to run through its analyzing process, and it's going to try to figure out the best way to remove this noise. And you can see right off the bat, it's not really doing a lot. So what we're going to do is actually go change automatic to manual, and I'm going to sample an area of the strongest noise, and I'm going to click measure noise. Now you can see we're starting to get somewhere, but there's still a little bit of grain. So what I want to do is actually go back into the reduce, and where we have contrast noise, I'm actually going to change that. Instead of 100%, I'm going to make it 150%. And you can see now it's even softer. That looks pretty good to me. And if we roll this before and after, you can really start to see the difference. We can move the navigator here, and you can really see the difference between that grain and the sky. Could probably even go a little bit higher, but I'm going to leave it at 150 for now, and I'll say OK. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and trash this tonal contrast because I don't need it. But actually, you know what? Before I do that, let's take a look at the before and after. Let's zoom in, because I feel like we're really seeing a major difference between this grainy image here and what we got as a result with the define. Now, here's a good example though. Check out define on the building. It made it really soft, kind of these weird sort of watercolory details now. You notice that if I zoom in even more, see these windows here? We'll lose all those little details as well. So we need this grain in the cityscape itself. So what we actually want to do is gradually roll this off with a gradient. So we'll put a mask on here, select the gradient tool, and what I'm actually going to do is have that tonal contrast is just basically going to fade from here to here. So we're going to end up with this define and tonal. So we'll just call this tonal contrast. So far that looks pretty good. If I zoom in here again, I've added tonal contrast. You can see even with the define, I'm still going to end up with some of these pesky spots. So what we're going to have to do is go in and kind of clean these up. And I'm going to do an okay job of it here for you guys, just to set a good example. But when you go through this, if you want to keep this and make it perfect, it's a good visual game to go in here and systematically remove every single one of these spots. The more you apply the tonal contrast, detail extractor, any kind of contrast for that matter, it's just going to continue to be a burden to remove these things, because the higher you push things, the more you're going to see them, because we're actually creating contrast on some of these spots that you otherwise wouldn't see at all. But that looks pretty good for now. We're just going to go ahead and take that as it is. I'll go ahead and zoom back out. Well, what I want to do now is I want to increase the contrast of this region right here, basically right here in the sky. And I could pick a color corrector. I could actually maybe paint it in. We could do a dodge and burn layer. There's a bunch of different ways that I can do this, but I'm pretty sure that this area here falls directly as a midtone. And there's one way that I can find out where the tonality sits in this range on this particular image, and that's by just loading not an adjustment layers curve, but a regular curves layer. And I'm going to use Command M to load curves. The cool thing about curves is if I roll over the cityscape and click, you can see that little dot that's popping up on the curves. Well, I know that part of my darkest image is down here, and you can see that it's showing me on the curve where everything lies. Now if I start rolling over this, you can see that basically it's almost exactly in the midtone. So that's a good sign. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave everything intact here. I'm going to go to channels, and we're going to go ahead and create a midtone adjustment layer. So I'm going to select the RGB just like we've done before, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. I'm going to deselect everything, duplicate this mask, and invert the second one so we have highlights and shadows. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to subtract both of these masks. It's going to give me the nice error saying it has no idea what I'm trying to do and that you can't see anything, and we're going to create another layer for curves. Oh, here's where it gets fun. Now that I know that I'm controlling those midtones, you can see that I can change those midtones without changing the highlights. So what I'm going to do is lock it down a little bit here, and then I'm going to ramp it up. And you can see that I'm actually effectively blowing this area out in the midtones and causing crazy contrast in this weird cloud. The cool thing here is I'm locking these tones here, as I don't really want to change them too much. I'm locking them there, and then I'm able to just ramp this midtone up and add just some crazy contrast to that already strange, ominous cloud. Now that we have that done, the next thing to do is sharpen the cityscape. Now remember, this tonal contrast that also has a define layer on top sits on top from about here to here. So if I were to just show this layer, we can see that that's just going to make up for the sky and the tip of the skyscraper. So what I can do, since that's sitting right on top, is I can duplicate this layer, go under Filter, Other, High Pass, set it to 3, and then set it to Overlay. And I don't have to create a mask on this because the sky already sits right on top. So you can see this high pass filter here. We had the Hong Kong cityscape before the high pass. After the high pass, it just pops everything out. What I'm going to have to do here, though, is remove some of the water. So I'll go ahead and create a mask. Select the brush tool, appropriate size, swap the palette to black, and maybe a flow of about 30% here. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint using my quick mask mode here as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of some of the sharpness and some of this area in the water that I don't want. Not being too concerned about overlapping some of the cityscape. It doesn't all have to be razor sharp, but these areas here I definitely don't want to have any extra noise. Just like that. So we're going to go ahead and name this now to stay consistent. High pass filter 3px. And I'll name this midtones curves. Let's take a look at what we have. This looks pretty good. Now, everything so far looks pretty good. I've left it fully intact here, the full image, just because I kind of wanted to see where things were going before I cropped it. But you can see that everything right now looks pretty good. Next stage is to go ahead and crop this image and get rid of these borders. You can see here, I just want you to notice down here on the bottom of the screen, notice how this changes. It actually rotates counterclockwise by, this looks like about 1.5 degrees. And you can also see that this area is skewed more than this area here. So you can see that not only did the keystoning figure out what should be linear lines and how the cityscape should be oriented, but it also figured out what should be rotated too. So my level in camera, even though it showed that it was level, was actually off a little bit. So let's go ahead. The final thing that we're going to go ahead and do here is crop everything down. So just make sure that the ratio is set to clear, and we'll just go ahead and crop everything in. Crop a little bit of the city out there, crop everything down. Well, when I set up this shot, since I tilted the landscape down, I knew I was going to have to do some of this distortion correction. I went ahead to plan to shoot a little bit wider than I originally intended, just so that I could correct for this. That looks pretty good. Just hit enter. Now, there's something that I haven't talked about too much. I try to leave the delete crop pixels off. Now, the reason I do this is just in case I thought maybe I cropped in too much or I want to crop in more. If you leave this unchecked, you can always go back to the crop tool and basically pull the crop up and reveal all that stuff that was lost before. But by doing this, bear in mind that you're going to leave the file size based on the old size as opposed to the crop size. If you want to get rid of those exterior pixels, crop everything down exactly the way you have it, then click on delete crop pixels, because that will also take the file size, because you'll be losing the rest of that. And I'll just go ahead and click enter now. All right, so there's our gloomy Hong Kong scene. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at what we have here. So we have the final scene here. Here's what we shot before, and it's very gloomy, and here's what we shot after. So we're able to make something that's a little unique. We'll call it Gotham City, Hong Kong. I have to admit, while this is not the shot I was going for, it is pretty cool in its own right. It's very unique. Hong Kong, the weather changes every hour. It's in the subtropics. It's a crazy climate. In the summertime, you're going to get the dramatic skies. The next shot we're going to look at is in the summertime, and they tell you if you go to Hong Kong in the summertime, don't bring an umbrella, bring a snorkel. That's very true. And if we would have gotten the conditions that I wanted, I was hoping to get the conditions that we wanted, but since I wanted to show you guys an epic blend at the end, let's go ahead and take this to the next level. This is good enough. This is a pretty nice, sort of pretty good portfolio piece. Definitely something that will work for Instagram or sharing on Facebook and everything like that. But now it's time to take it to a next level and blend the sun, the fiery sun in the sky, with a blue hour and a much clearer atmosphere. So let's go back into Capture One. And we're going to forget about this for a while. Let's talk exactly about what I have here. And again, just to be easy, I've went ahead and highlighted these green, the ones that I intend to work on for you guys so you can find them easier. I'm including a few extra files here. Now, this is where it's artistic license, right? I really love blending scenes together because if you could witness one moment in time and capture it, the most epic sunrise or sunset you've ever seen or blue hour, you've created something that nobody else has seen because it's never happened before, this cloud pattern. But when you can combine two things together or three things together, then you create something that's truly unique. It's also a way for me to have a lot of fun in post-processing because that's something I truly enjoy, is the puzzle of how to put these things together seamlessly. Not just because I like compositing things in for no reason, but because I like the puzzle of creating things that feel seamless, that are made up of different elements. So let's take a look at what I have. And I've given you guys, if you take a look here, we have the blue hour that we're going to work is in green, but it's a little bit blown out in the sky. So on your own, if you want to experiment a little bit, I've given you the underexposed version too, so you can actually create a beautiful blue hour scene. Or, in a similar fashion here, you have a really dark city in the foreground and the sky, so what I've done is given the underexposed one for the sun and the overexposed one here for the city. So it'll give you options later if you want to go in and experiment on your own to see which one you like better. Whether you like the one with the no lights in the city, whether you want the blue hour shot, or you like better what we're blending together now. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to establish the background. Now that changes sometimes. You guys have seen me work with sort of different versions. In Rome, we composited the lights over the sunny sky, and in this case I'm going to do it the same way. Now you can feel free to do it a different way. If you wanted to start with the blue hour as a base, you could do it, you just do the mask opposite. So basically what I'm going to be doing is bringing this into Photoshop and masking this portion in. If you were to bring this version into Photoshop, you'd mask this portion in. My preference is always to establish the sky first and then work from there. So what we're going to do first is first correct the distortion and then get on to the keystoning. So what I'm going to do here is just say 100, 100, and 100. We're also going to do the keystoning here, so just as a reference, I'm going to crank those shadows up so that we can see those edges nice and clear, and I'm going to go right into the keystoning. I'm going to do this one manually again because I'm not exactly sure about the tilt and everything. We want to make sure that that is rock solid. So I'm going to go ahead and draw these, just kind of put them where I think they're going to go. And I think we can follow, we can trust the edges of these buildings. We've already used them once before in the gloomy Hong Kong. And I'm going to zoom way in so that I can get this as close to accurate as possible. The better you can do with the keystoning, the more accurate your lines are going to be. We'll just go ahead and find the edges here. You also have to make sure these buildings, let's just hope that they are straight. If they're not, then Hong Kong has bigger problems than you and I know. All right, so we'll just go ahead and put these out. That looks pretty good. I think this one needs to go out just a little bit. This isn't the easy thing, it's not really an easy thing to do. You have to make sure that it's down to the pixel accurate to the best of your ability. And it's hard when you have areas that are windows. So it's easier to find edges like this that are against sort of a dark area, or even better, edges like this here. So we know that that's going to be a consistent edge. That looks pretty good. I'll bring this one out a little bit. Take a look, move that out one more, just like that so it parallels it. That looks good. Let's go ahead and zoom that out and apply it. That looks pretty good, at least close enough. Yeah, that's not bad, good. Next thing we're gonna do, go ahead and crop outside image, go to the crop tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and crop outside. Same thing, I like to handle the cropping myself here. All right, that looks good. Now with that enabled, I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the select tool. Now what I'm going to do is something a little bit different. I need this to be consistent through all of these frames. Basically the ones that I'm going to use, but I'm going to go ahead and apply them to all anyway, and I'm going to take the shadow all the way back down. So right now basically what I have is the distortion and the removal, the correction of the distortion, the linear distortion. So what I'm going to do now is select this file that I've made these changes to, copy the adjustments, and then I'm going to select the rest of the files, right-click, and apply the adjustments. And that's going to apply all of those distortion corrections to it, sync them across each file without changing any of these options too. So I've made sure to keep all that consistent before moving on. So now let's get back to adjusting this file and establishing the color correction we're going to do before we bring it into Photoshop. First thing we're going to need to do is definitely recover the shadows. Now, this is still a little bit blown out in the sky. and you can see that that's reflected here. The reason I didn't go with this image is because this is really blown out in the sky. From here, this is really dark in the foreground. But these are really powerful raw files, and Capture One's a very powerful raw editor, so I feel like we can get this all with a single raw. Also, keep in mind that we're not really concerned too much about the cityscape, we just want it to overlap correctly. We're more concerned with the sky. So what we're going to do is, the first thing though, is just to get rid of the dark areas here, let's go ahead and crank the shadows up just a little bit. And maybe go up to something around 25. Next thing I need to do is compensate for the highlights. Let's go until that basically looks good. I think that was a little bit too much. And we'll see what's blown out here. Just a tiny little bit. So just pull that down just a little bit more. Just about there. I'm fine with it being just a hair blown out. One thing that I've noticed about this file though is compared to this one, and you can see it is a white balance issue too, but it's also full dark to sunrise. So during the blue hour, we're getting all this reflected light, so it's a very cold scene, but it's also very saturated. Take a look at the blues, the pinks here. Even when we roll down here, we're going to have different colors. Whereas this scene seems to be really flat and gray. Even though this is a fiery sun, we've lost some of that tonality because it's kind of a flat, raw look. So what I'm going to do also is compensate by raising the saturation up just a little bit. And just to get some of that back, I'm going to go up to about 15%. I'm not trying to get it all back, I just want some of these blues to be intact before we go into Photoshop. So before we take this into Photoshop though, let's go ahead and start compensating for our other shot. And our other shot that we're going to be blending is in this sun. We're going to actually blend these lights into the foreground. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So I think that here, in the same fashion, this is going to be a little bit too dark. So we're going to have to bring that up just a little bit. So let's bring the shadows up just a hair, just to compensate for that. Keep the similar tonality so that it looks like it will blend a little bit with the sky, or a little bit better. And I'm also going to pull the highlights down just a little bit, just so we know we don't have too much that's blown out. We'll double check that. And again, just starting to peak here, just in the lights is fine. We don't have to worry about the sky. That's not really our concern. We're only concerned about the foreground. And I also don't want to make it too bright. I want it to kind of reflect a similar tonality to this here. And you can see that I've pretty much gotten that if we look at these two together, or one after another. Aside from the lights, the tonality is fairly close. So with both of these selected, I'm going to go ahead and say right-click here, Export Variants. Just like last time, I've already brought the before images in, so I'm going to go ahead and compile these right on top so that we can start to have a look at this from start to finish. So here we have a build-up here of the original raw file that we started with, an adjusted raw file, and then we're getting into the blue hour shot. Now that we're in Photoshop, we have to do the hard part. And the hard part is getting these two things to work together. But I'm going to show you guys something very complex here, and it's a gradient ramp. So I lied, it's not complex at all. But the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put this in a folder here, just in case I need to do other things to this layer, or I want it to have its own independent mask. And on this folder here, I'm just going to put a mask, and we're going to do a very simple gradient here from black to white. So basically, I need this layer to fade out from here to about here. And you can see that that's not quite right. I'm going to need it to be a little bit more harsh there, and that looks a little bit better. And basically what I'm trying to do is fade these lights in to this sky. So I want some of the mountains to be intact here and everything else. At this point, what I'm going to do is start painting in manually some other parts of this detail. So right now with the cityscape back here, I'm going to use a white brush because I want some of this cityscape to be in the frame with a flow of 10. I'm just going to go real soft brush here, and I'm just going to start painting in some of the cityscape back in to make sure that I don't lose any of that. So I definitely want all that nice detail, all those nice lights back in. If I hit the backslash key, you can see that I can see that edge that I've created for myself, which looks pretty good. And I'm just going to kind of blend some of this stuff in just to keep it nice, basically, keep it clean. The other thing that I have to decide is I have to decide whether I want the mountains from this layer here, or I want the mountains from the sun layer. And you can see that they're a little bit different in tonality. Now really pay attention to around the sun here. See those oranges? That's really important. And if I toggle this on, you can see that that changes temperature completely. So that may lead me to believe that I should probably go ahead and add some more of the mountain tonality in so that I get that warmth on those mountains. And I'm just going to do that with a brush. So this part is not an exact science. This is really when blending comes into place and artistic license comes into play here. And the other thing that we have to pay attention to is, check this out. If I turn this off, notice how we have this pooling reflection. Well, right now it looks completely different than this. So what I'm actually going to do is paint this reflection in, and I'm going to do that by removing it here. So what I'm going to do is, again, zoom in a little bit, and we can do this a couple different ways. You can either paint, which I prefer since I'm using the Wacom stylus, or you can actually just go ahead and draw around these things with a lasso or with a pen tool, or whichever way you think is most efficient or easiest. But for me, it doesn't have to be an exact science because I'm actually blending. So what I'm actually going to do is just go ahead and paint. And I'm going to pick a flow of about 30, and I'm just going to start painting this in. And I'm not going to be too concerned about the edges yet. I'm just going to go ahead and do the basic section of this. Now bear in mind what's cool about this is right now there are lights over here. So let's go ahead and change this brush size a little bit, change the hardness of the brush so that I can start working on this area. But right now there are lights over here, but nobody knows which light should and shouldn't be on. So for example, if I were to start to sort of paint some of this out here so it was darker, nobody would really know the difference. They just think that those were dark towers. Where you have to start being careful is the areas around the bank, because you want to enable it to have some of the reflection in the water, but you don't want to take the lights down from the shoreline. So those lights on the street, those street lights, those are very important. You can see we can kind of just blend it into itself. This is where it gets kind of fun too. And we're going to do a little bit more to match this, but we can really use different parts of the scene. So if I start painting over this water bus stop right here, this metro station, you can see that I can actually use some of the color from the background instead of the foreground. So I'm just going to be really careful here to start painting around these edges really carefully. Well, the reason that this one is a lot more complex than the last ones we've worked on is because it requires more of an artistic vision. Because this is something that really is not meant to exist. A sun with a nightscape. So it's taking two very different extremes together and trying to convince the viewer that it exists. So it's not just a one-to-one gradient blend. It's going to require some creativity to sort of figure out where we push one and pull the other, and how we put them together. So it requires a lot more work. That's why I wanted to save this one for last. So again, I'm just painting. I'm being as careful as possible. You guys kind of noticed I really enjoy painting. I think it's the easiest way to do this kind of stuff, especially when it doesn't have to be an exact science. The nice thing is you can change this, the brush size, and you can kind of just intuitively paint some of these reflections in. So if we didn't do this, it would be very unrealistic for a fiery sun to be in the sky and not reflect any light at all. That would just look odd. But what we can do here is we can pick it up with a lighter opacity, and we can make sure that we can sort of either fade some of this in here to bring it and unify it, or fade some of it out also to unify it. So that gives us the ability to kind of do some of this and bring some of this back. We can actually go right into this line right here, bring these lights back. Into this tower here, bring this tower back a little bit. And if we bring too much back, we can see we're getting that blue color again, and then we can just sort of fade. And we can sort of create the best of both worlds here. Now that's looking pretty good for this side. Might want to go a little closer to the shore here, a little bit closer over here. Maybe add a little bit of that darkness, that dullness from the color. And now I'm going to move on to here. Yeah, let's blend a little bit more around these towers here. Doesn't look too bad. Let's go ahead and blend that out a little bit. Blend this in. And now here's where it gets even more sort of artistic. Soften the brush and sort of bring some of this in here. Fade it in. Because here's where the water starts to get to be very similar in tonality to the blue. Water reflections are really only going to reflect that heat of the sun close to the sun, and then they're going to taper off. So as long as we use a small opacity of this in here, we should be pretty good. So we can take a look at what we have now. Now we have a reflection, albeit a little bit of a dull one, but we've been able to maintain the reflection and the blue hour and the sky. So this is our basic blend, but it still needs a little bit of work before we take it to the next level. And really what we have to do now is we have to bring these color palettes back into some sort of harmony. Right now this one is not blue at all. This is very blue. This is pale, this is very saturated, so we're going to go ahead and compensate by doing a few color corrections. First thing I'll do though is I'll go ahead and name these layers. Remember guys, you can always go back and refer to these PSDs as examples too. That's why I name everything. We'll call this adjusted. And blend mask. First thing that I want to do is change the tonality of the sky a little bit so that it matches the foreground. And I'm going to do that by adding a curves layer. So we're going to select just above this layer here, and we're going to add curves. And the first thing that I need to do is, you see here in the mountain, it's warm compared to where this is cool. What I'm actually going to do is cool it off by just adding blue. And you can see that if I pull the blue in, I'm actually adding that blue. And I just want to add enough to where the mountain starts to blend in with itself. So we still get some of the warmth back there, but it starts to change some of the tonality. It also softens up this water layer, which is a really good thing. Now that I'm also doing that, I'm going to change a little bit more here, because once I compensate for the blue, we've lost a little bit of this. So if I add red to blue, I'm going to get more of a purple tone. So I'm just going to be able to bring that out a little bit. And it's just going to change it. It's going to help unify that a little bit. And then between the two colors, what I'm going to do is just boost everything until I get something that looks pretty palatable. So we go from here to here. That's starting to look pretty good. It's made this a little bit pale, but it's made it a little bit more realistic. So I'm just going to go ahead and tweak that a little bit. Now if you want to, and I'm not going to do it here, but you can also add luminosity and change things as well. So if you're off a little bit with your raw adjustment, here's where you can change that overall luminosity to match. But I'm also doing that by bumping these color spectrums. Remember, when you do RGB together, it creates white, so two together create a color. Blue and red obviously create nice and purple. They add, more vibrance to it throughout, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here. So what I'm also going to do now is I've managed to very simply blend that background in so that it matches a little bit better with the tonality of the foreground. But the tonality of the foreground is still very saturated. So what am I going to do to mitigate that? Well, there's this really great tool in Color Efex Pro, and that's actually going to be called White Neutralizer. The reason I put this in a folder is because I wanted to be able to select this and go into Nik Collection Color Efex Pro and make edits to it without it having its own mask. Let's go ahead and select White Neutralizer. I'm going to turn this all the way down here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the zoom 100%, and I'm going to go, I'm going to go all the way down here. And what I'm trying to mitigate here is some of this blue in the building, so I'm going to color sample a little bit of this blue, one of these neutral tones here. And it looks like it's selected it. And now what I'm going to do is adjust entire image. Let me go ahead and zoom out so we can see what's going on here. Now, adjust whole image is really powerful because it'll flood it with the complementary color, whatever it's going to do to neutralize that blue, which is going to be a warm tone. Very similar to when we use Pro Contrast and we do the correct color. It's basically doing almost the same thing. So I'm going to do a little bit of that, and we neutralize this white, it'll actually desaturate that color. So all the way I almost make a monochromatic image. What I'm trying to do is just neutralize a tiny bit of that color and adjust the whole image. So again, we'll zoom back into where we had it, and we'll look at a before and after. And what I'm going to do is just change it just a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy with it. I don't want to neutralize too much of it because I like that saturation, but I want to remove just a hair just to unify it. So we're going to go with something like that. Click OK to apply it. With that applied, let's take a look at the before and the after. So you can see that's helped unify it a lot, but I still think it's a little bit too intense. So what I'm actually going to do is take this white neutralizer and just roll up the opacity until I get something that I like. And in this case, probably around 65, 70% of the original target that I selected. So just to pull a little bit of that out, I still want the saturation, but I realize that it's not a blue hour anymore because it's a sunrise that we're blending it with. So we're just trying to bring them closer to a par, So it's basically finding that balance between, whether we're going to color correct the background to overcompensate or the foreground. What I like to do is try to bring them both to where they're sort of in harmony, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do now. I'm just trying to be very careful that I don't overdo it because I do like that rich saturation that we have, so I don't want to ruin that. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer really quick, and I'm just going to merge this one down so that I get a flat new result here of a before and an after. I'll save in the background when we move on to the next step. So what I want to address now is essentially this tonality in the water. So it's very important to me that I'm able to color correct just this one area. So I'm going to add another curves just to this area here. Well, let's go ahead and add another curves layer. And I feel like this is a little too dark, so what I want to do is just bump the opacity of this a little bit here, and I'm also going to be adding some red, and I'm just going to do that by cranking this red just to change that color. So we're going to pull the red up a little bit. We're actually going to change the gamma of the red just to make it more of a soft orange, and then I'm going to mess with the RGB tonality, and this is called a gamma boost, just to make it feel like it belongs with this tonal range. And I think I've gone a little bit too far. Let's go back to the red, pull that down just a little bit, and we're actually just going to add a little bit of gamma to it. Now this is destroying my sky layer, so I don't really want that to happen. So basically the only places that it's going to exist is in this small area here. I'll go right to the gradient tool, and from white to black I'll just say that it's going to exist from here to here. Let's go a little bit further. And we'll take a look at the before and the after. And now we're starting to get something that looks just a little bit cleaner. Now that we have the mask though, I am a little bit worried that it's a little too red, so we'll just bring that down just a little bit. I'm really trying to do that. And again, if you're using a stylus or using a mouse, you can select that point and you can just use the arrow up and down just to get it exactly where you want it. Sometimes that's much easier than trying to do it with selection. So as of now, this looks like a pretty good base blend. From this point, it might be a good idea to just go ahead and take all of this together, and we'll go ahead and stick it in a folder here, call it blend. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and adjust the cropping, and then once we adjust the cropping, we'll go ahead and take it to the next level and start adding the sharpness and the details that we like to do on all of our files here. So let's just go ahead and figure out what our cropping point's going to be. I've never liked this building here in Hong Kong. I feel like it's, it really stands out, so I really don't mind cropping that at all. So we'll just go ahead and do that. We'll crop the sky down a little bit. Remember I showed you guys before, you can always crop to the sky if you want to create, if you feel like you're cropping something out that you shouldn't be cropping out, you can always go ahead and just crop to the sky here, and then you guys have already learned how we can warp that part of the sky back. But in this case, I don't feel like I'm cropping anything that's important. I have all my towers pretty much intact here. This one down here, this residential tower, is not that important. In fact, I can probably kind of come up a little bit more on that to about there. And again, I'm just going to make sure that I keep a lot of that heat down here, those lights. I really like those lights. With something like that applied, in this case, I'm not going to delete the crop pixels either, just in case I change my mind later, and we'll go ahead and return and keep that result. Oh, that's starting to look like more of a balanced scene. So let's take it to the next level. Let's go ahead and use that awesome hotkey, Shift, Option, Command, E. Cool. And now what we're going to do is go back into Color Efex Pro and start adding some pop and texture to this. So let's go ahead and go to Color Efex Pro, add some of our favorite filters. First thing I want to do is jump into Pro Contrast a little bit, and let's go ahead and correct the contrast just a little bit, and let's pull some of that dynamic contrast. That's why I rolled back from Capture One. I didn't pull too much of the shadows out because I knew I'd be able to do that here. Side effect though, and I just want to make this an even number this time, side effect of this here is that by adjusting the contrast, I'm also starting to blow out the sun a little bit here. So I have a couple choices. I can roll the highlights back to try to get that back, and you see it doesn't. Or in this case, what I'm going to do is subtract the sun from this. So we're not actually going to add any contrast to this area surrounding the sun. We want to keep that intact. So we have a before and after. Basically everything around this area gets the adjustment, but this stays nice and intact so it's not blown out. Next thing that I want to do is I want to pop the colors a little bit. A quick way to pop these colors, the blues and the reds and everything here, is going to be with a polarizer. So we'll go ahead and pick the polarization, and I'm going to change the strength until I like what I see. And actually I'm going to go, I think right about 100% looks perfect. Let's go ahead and take a look at this again. And we want to make sure that it looks good, but here's the issue here. We're also going to blow out those values. These values were so close to being clipped that we have to be very careful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove it here, but I don't want to remove it all the way. So what I'm going to do is change this opacity. And you can see as I start to pull the opacity down, I can have some of the effect, not all of the effect, and then I'm not going to blow this out. So maybe 20% of the effect there with the polarization throughout. And you can see what it's doing. It's pulling these blues back. I removed a little bit, it's starting to put it back. But the main thing that it's doing is it's unifying all of these tones. So notice it's popping all these tones. All of these areas where I've created these seams, these blends, now it's trying to pull it all together. So let's go ahead and apply that now. Well, it looks pretty good so far. Okay, this is just a utility layer. I'm going to leave it intact for now, but I could delete it since the blend is the exact same thing. But right now we're starting to get some of that contrast back. So this looks pretty good. This area I feel is really contrasty, really poppy, but I feel like the sky is a little bit dull. So what I want to do is go back into Nik Collection, back into Color Effects Pro, and let's add some tonal contrast to the sky. Pro contrast is the first thing there. Let's say tonal contrast, and again, it does ludicrous speed to begin with. Let's go ahead and turn all that down. And I think I'm going to do something really easy. So I'm just going to say 8, and you can see even 8, 8, and we'll say 10 for the opacity. Let's see what happens here. Let's see how that looks. We have a nice before and after. And now starting to pop those details out a little bit. I'm not going to use viewpoints to select the sky. What we're going to do is go ahead and apply this and then use a gradient ramp. Very cool. That's looking really nice. Let's go ahead and add a gradient to this. We'll just go ahead and make sure the mask is selected, and I'll say just about from here to here, so that we get this nice ramp up of intensity on the sky. And you can see that sky is really starting to pop, and now it's starting to fit a little bit more with the background. But here's where things start to get a little bit more challenging. Now we're talking about really precise control. So right now I love the blues here, I love the way everything looks. This is even starting to look really nice, this reflection. But I don't like the ways the blues look here. So let's do something a little bit different. I've done this before, but let's go ahead and select the blue channel. Actually, before we select it, we'll take a look. Well, let's look at the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So you can see the blue channel has this whole area of blue, and it kind of cuts out the red and some of the greens and different things like that. So let's go ahead and select the blue channel. I'm going to create a new mask for the blue. And what I'm going to do here is clamp this. I'm going to clamp it with the curves, and what I'm going to try to do is just try to get a selection of this area of the sky, and I'm going to try to minimize the imprint on the rest of the clouds around it. This is color, so it doesn't have to be an exact science. We want some bleed through, but not too much. So this is now clamped blues. I'll select this again, disable it. And what I'm going to do is create a folder for this with a mask on it. I'll just go ahead and name it Blue Channel. Looks good. So what I'm going to do now is grab a curves layer. Now the cool thing is what I basically want to do is I want to add some blue accent to the blue parts of the sky without adding blue to the orange parts of the sky. And I'm going to do that just by adding blue. But the cool thing is, since I've already selected the blues, I have a better chance of just targeting the blues specifically. So we'll just go ahead and ramp this up just a little bit, and you can see now I'm saturating those blues quite a bit. And you can see if I go too much, you can see I'm saturating the blues all over the place. Now, leaving this turned up very, very high, I want to show you something that a negative effect of what's happening here. Since there's so much red here, blue is going to give me purple. Now purple works sometimes in the sky, but not that much. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and set the blue tone that I want, which is just going to be a little bit like this. And that actually looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and close this down. Now, with the brush tool selected, I'm going to paint out the areas that I don't want this. So actually, before I do that, I better go ahead and do the gradient. So the gradient means that I'm just going to go ahead and have it be in the sky here. So now I've masked that out, so I just have the sky. And now what I'm going to do is select the brush tool, and I'm going to paint out this area here. It's really lightly, because I want to keep the fiery sense of this. And I'll just go ahead and fade it a little bit so we keep that intensity, but then we get these nice blues throughout. And we'll pull it out of here too, so we get this nice fiery aspect. Another thing that we can do here on the same level is we can go to channels, and I can also go to the red channel. Let's just take a look at the red channel real quick. And notice I get all this selection here. Well, let's go ahead and do the same thing we've done with the red channel. Let's go ahead and create another mask here. And let me go ahead and do the same thing to clamp it. This time I'll move this off so we can see. I'm really concerned about this area here, so I'm just going to go ahead and clamp it down a little bit like this, clamp it up a little bit like this, and say OK, and I'll go ahead and load this one, create another layer up here, a folder, a mask, and we'll call it red channel. Inside the red channel, I'm going to create another curves. Here's where it gets really fun. I'm going to start ramping up the reds. That looks pretty good. Now, here's the concerning area. This is bad. It's a little bit too blown out. But here's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of add some intensity of red just in this area of the sky right here. So I'm going to black out this entire mask, and I'm going to grab a smaller brush with a very light opacity. I'm just going to kind of custom paint some of this heat back into the sky in these other areas. So any of these areas here that I want to have a little bit more red heat, it's very subtle, but I basically want this orange to continue a little bit stronger out here. And what I want to be very careful of is that I don't hit this area. And if I select these curves, you can see that I'm basically trying to avoid hitting this spike right here. And so far, I haven't done that. And that looks pretty good. So you can see it's very subtle, but the more I paint in here, the more fiery I can make that color. We'll kind of connect it right here at the edge. And that looks pretty good. Again, this is artistic license. You can do a little bit of this or a lot of it just to kind of add some of that heat and that color back in. So now that we've done some basic color correction here, we can just toggle these on and off. And you can see it's subtle here, but it does add up to be quite a bit, add some overall tonality. But what I really want to do here, and I'm going to turn these off for now, I'm going to go into the channels and we're going to create a mid-tone mask. We've done that a few times before, so this should just be a review. What I'm going to do is select the RGB, and then I'm going to create a new mask here. Deselect, duplicate, invert, select all, and subtract both of these together. Say OK to the warning, and what I'm going to do is just add one more curves layer. We'll just go ahead and turn these back on. We'll go ahead and on top of this layer here, I'll add curves with everything selected. So now you can see the mask itself, very flat and dull, but it's left out the highlights, left out the shadows. It's given me a good way to basically clamp this down. So this is going to be my final contrast layer to this, to just pop all the values out. So you can see I can bring those values down in the midtones here, and I can really raise them up in this area here. So that looks pretty nice. So it's adding just a lot more beautiful contrast overall to this image. And I can just kind of get this S curve to look exactly how I want it. And you can see that's starting to pop those details out. You can really lock it down maybe about here and just pop more of those details out here. You can see that starting to look pretty nice. I'm going to change the channel here all the way to RGB so we can see what's happening. And we don't have too much clipped. If I turn this on and off, you can see I'm starting to clip those values just a little bit. So what we can do is we can go, full out on this one here with this curve, basically give it the tonality that we want. And then we can also just brush out a little bit here in the center just to make sure that we're not blowing out our highlights. So just with about 10%, just kind of black out a little bit more of that, just so we know that we're not wrecking our highlights. And now we have some nice global tonality to this image, and that looks really good. Last thing that I want to do here is create a high pass filter. So we're going to go ahead and take the original, we'll take the Color Effects Pro. I'll go ahead and delete this. File's getting a little bit big. Duplicate it, throw it right on top here. Filter other high pass. Radius of 3. That looks pretty good. Close this down, set it to overlay. And again, with this, what I'm going to do is just make sure that we have a gradient on it. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we don't high pass filter the sky. So from white to black, we'll say from about here to here. And if we zoom in again on this high pass filter, you can see that we have a before and after. That all looks pretty good. With the 3 radius, we're starting to get a halo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it for most of this image. We'll go ahead and put this on the quick mask, and I'll brush out some more just so we get rid of it in the water. We do not want the high pass on the water. And if these towers, kind of collateral damage, it's not such a big deal. We probably don't need any sharpening on the background, to be honest. Clean that up. Perfect. Let's go ahead and turn that off, and let's take a look. So before we wrap this up, I just want to kind of zoom in here and I want to look at the sky. There is a little bit of noise, So you guys remember the solution to that? We did the same thing. We were talking about the Gotham City version. I could go into this tonal contrast layer and I could go back into define and I could soften it. Now, since this tonal contrast only exists in the sky, I could soften a little bit and I can get rid of that noise. This file size is already starting to get rather large, so feel free to do that. And in fact, that's how I take it to the next step. That's the last thing I do, is just get rid of this noise here. But since we just did it in the last file, I'll let you guys do that step on your own. What I want to take a look at is I want to take a step back from this and really take a look at the image and see sort of where we came from to where we ended up. So we have a lot of layers here, and you can see all the way back down on the blend, if we go to the original raw, it's almost unrecognizable. So we have the basis of the sky being recognizable, but then it goes from there to there. We've created something extremely unique. And what's cool about it is we've done it in stages. So if we really take a look at what we were able to do, we're able to adjust this, bring out the shadows, then we were able to blend this area back in, and then with different color correction, we were able to start to unify it. After we unified it, we were able to do some other stuff here just in Color Effects Pro that pulls it all together, and then finally we were able to add the finishing touches on the contrast to get an image that's completely unique. So while we were in Hong Kong, we really did the best job we possibly could to get a shot like this to work on, but thankfully I visit Hong Kong all the time. Victoria Peak is one of my favorite places to shoot from in the morning, and every day I go up there it's something completely different. I can say that this one here that you're seeing was 5 mornings in Victoria Peak before I actually even saw the sun. So that was already a result of a lot of hard work and a lot of early mornings to get this shot. So that wraps up this lesson on Victoria Peak. We were able to take the one file, the Gotham City, Hong Kong, and take that to the next level. It was gloomy, but it still came out pretty cool. And then I was able to go through my archives and we were able to look at a scene that has everything that I wanted to capture on location. A fiery sun and a beautiful, just clear sky, clear atmosphere, and a blue hour. And we've done a lot of blending so far in this tutorial. I just want to remind you guys that this is never really an exact science. Though we're using precise tools to blend things together, this is all artistic license. Feel free to push it as far as you want to go. Every time I put one of these together, they come out a little bit different because my eye sees something that I didn't see before. So sometimes blending these things together, they take their shape. Sometimes I build them 2 or 3 times before I'm happy with the final blend. The reason is because that it's not an exact science. We have the ability to do it many different ways, by changing the tones, by changing the amount of light, and even shifting little things. Now, for this example, I picked an extreme blue hour and an extreme sunrise. If you put things that were closer together, maybe it was a late blue hour with just a little bit of light and an earlier sky when the sun wasn't all the way up, these are moments that are closer in time and they're easier to blend together. So I wanted to pick 2 moments that seem like they wouldn't work together and create an example for you guys to work with where you could really push reality and create a super moment in time, something that will never happen again, and something we were able to take a lot of artistic license to create and create something that was very unique and beautiful.